When was the last time you were really angry? Maybe you're like, oh, that was on the way in today. Maybe you can't remember. You could ask someone you live with; they would tell you. Maybe some of us, it's easy to think about, or perhaps it's hard for us to remember. Saying, "Wow, I don't really know when I was angry." In part because maybe this is an oversimplification, but in part we think anger looks like this, just like straight up rage, right? This is what an angry person looks like. This is what I look like when I'm angry. And we think like, no, I never look like that, or I don't do that, or I can't remember the last time I felt like that. But at times, anger actually looks a lot different for different people for different reasons at different times. Sometimes it looks like this, the old cut eye. Like, I'm not opening my mouth. I'm not expressing rage, but I am really mad. Or perhaps the crossed arms, right? A little bit of like standing off at a distance, a little bit of withdrawal, a little bit of like, I'm closed off to you. I'm really angry. Or maybe even more explicit, a turned back, right? Someone who actually, when we turn away or turn our back on someone or walk out of the room, we show someone our back, we're leaving. That can also be a very quiet but very loud expression of anger. Or for some of us, it's like, I can't remember the last time I was really at, but I've sent some nasty texts, right? Like I get angry with my thumbs. And that's how I express anger. Anger, a lot these days, we can express in words over devices. Or look at this guy. Look how angry he is. We're all laughing, right? Because we know sometimes you can hide anger behind a really nice smile, right? Gritted teeth are just like, hey, I'm livid inside. And then, of course, possibly even this. Actually, no. This is not an expression of anger. This is actually someone who is just legitimately in a very difficult position that many of us find ourselves in on the road. And that is that the person in the left lane should not be in the left lane. Just kidding. My wife is literally sending me a text right now saying, that's road rage. That's anger. Right? All these different expressions of anger. Anger is a complicated emotion. It's actually probably one of the most common emotions we have, but it is complicated, right? Sometimes we feel guilty about it, or we feel afraid of it. We're afraid of like what it looks like when others express anger. Sometimes we're very unaware of how we are being angry or how our anger comes across or impacts other people. Sometimes we just learn to stuff it down, or we just want to kind of, once we've gotten angry, we just want to move past and quickly, oh yeah, it's over now. Just kind of move on quickly. I've cooled down or whatever. It's a complicating, but it's a very common emotion, but it looks like different things in different people at different times. I would say it also is complicated for people of faith. Like my journey as a young person, like my parents, I don't really remember this, but my parents tell me that I used to get angry a lot when I was younger or like argue with them, whatever. I think it was just normal teenager, but you can talk to them about it. But then as I grew up, I kind of thought that I grew out of it, that I was, and that I never really, for years, never really got angry. Just felt like I was pretty calm, could take things in stride. I just thought I was very self-controlled and everyone else was stressed and I was good. Till I had kids, all of a sudden it's like, where does this anger come from? Blame the children, right? All of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, sometimes they get angry and that brings out anger in me. And I was realizing, man, I have to learn how to deal with this. Then I become a pastor and I'm thinking, man, definitely, like church is one of those places where we're like, oh, you don't express anger here, right? Our people at home might see our anger, but people at church, we're like, oh, is that an angry person? Oh no, I've never seen them angry. Well, because we manage it at church in part because we believe like, oh, I thought I'm a pastor. You can't show anger, right? Like that's not a godly thing, right? And that is a complicating thing. We don't think that anger has a place in our journey of faith. Like somehow we think we cannot be angry in the presence of God. Maybe sometimes we think, oh, I certainly cannot be angry with God. Like that's not okay to be angry in the presence of God or be angry with God. Like I said, we kind of think church is not a place where you bring your anger or whatever. It's a place you go to calm down, and we shouldn't show anger or express it or talk about it. Or perhaps some of you got off the faith train because you were angry with God and you were pretty sure that was the end of the road for you because there's no way you can be angry with God, and so I just have to leave. The reason we're talking about this is anger is one of the places where we will find ourselves from time to time or in situations, and it's really important to know that actually we can find God there as well. We are beginning today a 4-week series with myself and a friend of ours at another Alliance church named Sawyer Bullock. And over the next 4 weeks, we will be tag teaming 4 messages called You Are Here, Encountering God in Unexpected Places. You know, one of the things we say at our church, one of our values is our faith is about everyday life. And in my own life and in the conversations with many of you and many people, we often struggle to encounter or meet God in our everyday life. And especially when we find ourselves in unexpected places, like certain experiences or like the emotion of anger, we're like, I don't think God is here. How come? I didn't even expect to be here. I don't think God is here. And just actually to realize, no, in the ebbs and flows and zigs and zags of everyday life, even when we find ourselves in unexpected or even undesirable places, that God meets us here. It's a double play. Like, you are here in this place. Oh, God, you are here too. And certainly that's true as I want to begin today with the emotion and experience of anger, that anger is not a place that we have to leave in order to get close to God. We don't have to leave the presence of God if we are angry. We can even be in the presence of God when we are angry with him. And one of the reasons we know that for sure is that the writers of the various books that make up this kind of library that we call the Bible often are expressing or dealing with anger. In particular, actually, the book, one of the chapters we're going to hang out today in, is in a book called the Psalms. And the Psalms are the songs and the prayer book of the people of faith. And there's a lot of angry songs in the Psalms. Like, you thought Metallica was the only people who wrote angry songs. No, the psalmists, there are angry songs. And what's so fascinating about the book of Psalms, which we're actually going to look at every week through this 4-week series, these are prayers/songs that were written by individuals in their own life with God, but then they were given as public songs to give to the church. And the church, I don't remember, when was the last time we sang an angry song at church, right? Like, these are not things that we're comfortable with in our songs, in our worship life. In fact, there's a whole category of psalms called the cursing psalms. Like, they should come with a parental advisory, right? Like, these are angry songs. And it's weird for us to think about that or sing it. In fact, the psalm we're going to look at today, I don't think we've ever read at our church because it doesn't feel comfortable. It's not common. And yet there's a whole chunk of prayers/songs given to the people of faith that deal with or express anger. The one we're going to look at today is Psalm 94, and literally the opening lines are, "O Lord, the God of vengeance." It's almost like the title of the song. It's like, this sounds like the opening line of like a death metal track. You're like, "God of vengeance," like electric guitars. It's like, what? Like, I don't remember reading. This is, would you tattoo that on your body or put that on, have your kids memorize that verse? Like, I'm going to read just a few sections from this psalm just to get a feel for words we do not read very often, but actually allow us to wrestle with, like, what does anger look like in the presence of God? And so this is Psalm 94, and I'm reading from verses 1 to 10, 16, 17, and 20 to 23. O Lord, the God of vengeance. That's kind of like the title. O God of vengeance, let your glorious justice shine forth. Arise, O judge of the earth. Give the proud what they deserve. How long, O Lord? How long will the wicked be allowed to gloat? How long will they speak with arrogance? How long will these evil people boast? They crush your people, Lord, hurting those you claim as your own. They kill widows and foreigners and murder orphans. The Lord isn't looking, they say. And besides, the God of Israel doesn't care. Now he turns his song to them. Think again, you fools. When will you finally catch on? Is he, like God, deaf, the one who made your ears? Is he blind, the one who formed your eyes? He punishes the nations. Won't he also punish you? He knows everything. Doesn't he also know what you are doing? But then he turns about his own situation. Well, who will protect me from the wicked? Who will stand up for me against evildoers? Unless the Lord had helped me, I would soon have settled in the silence of the grave. Can unjust leaders claim that God is on their side? Leaders whose decrees permit injustice? They gang up against the righteous and condemn the innocent to death. But the Lord is my fortress. My God is the mighty rock where I hide. God will turn the sins of evil people back on them. He will destroy them for their sins. The Lord our God will destroy them. Wow. Right? This psalm opens with, O Lord, God of vengeance, and it closes with, the Lord will destroy them. There's anger going on in this psalm, expressing a certain kind of a specific kind of anger that helps us begin to understand what role does anger play, or what does it look like in our life with God. And we see that there's kind of three things that he's angry with and expressing kind of this deep kind of grievance and frustration. One, he's angry at the injustices that are happening in the world around him. Right? Look what he says in verse 5 and 6. He says, they crush your people, Lord. They kill widows and foreigners and murder orphans. The language here is really significant and loaded. The language of widows, foreigners, and orphans each describe categories of very vulnerable people. Widows were very vulnerable because in those days, like your lot in life was tied to your marriage in terms of your job as a woman was you ran the domicile. This is what it was like in the ancient world. Not just looking after children, but you ran like any businesses that were operating in the home, baking and farming and all that. A woman played a key role in that. But the property, in a sense, belonged to the man and his family. And it was very an unjust situation for women, but it put them in a very vulnerable situation as well. Like if they lost their husband, they were basically destitute. And so widows were considered very vulnerable. Orphans, obviously, even more so if they lost their parents. And then foreigners, people who came in from another country, maybe who were displaced, who were refugees, or who came in who didn't have family, didn't have generational ownership of property or business, would have been very vulnerable as well. And the writer is angry at the people who are using power and oppression, whether they were actively killing them or just oppressing them to death or taxing them to death or whatever was happening to them. He's angry at injustice that is happening around him. But he's also angry at the injustices that have happened to him and his loved ones. In verse 16, he says, who will protect me? I'm also a victim of injustice, of evildoers, of the same wicked people that are perpetrating injustice to all these vulnerable people. They're also hurting me. And so he's angry, like, well, this is happening to me. And then I don't know, I've never had a direct conversation with them, but like, he's angry because he's asking for vengeance. And vengeance seems slow in coming. Look at verse 3, right? How long, O Lord? How long? How long are you going to let this go? Look at what's happening. He's asking for vengeance, and vengeance is slow in coming. He begins, God of vengeance, how long? How long what? How long till you bring vengeance? Look at this. He's pointing out he's calling God on his name, and then saying, look at what you're not doing. Look what's happening. How long? These are some of the repeated themes, 3 repeated themes in the cursing psalms, in these psalms of like anger at the injustice that's happening in the world to those who are weak and oppressed and marginalized, anger at injustice against the writer themselves, and then a little bit of at least frustration about anger of like God seeming silent or slow to move or uninterested in the plight of the needy. I think as we read a psalm like this, we can at the very least conclude there are some things that we can and should be angry about. There are some things that we can and should be angry about. In particular, we can and should be angry about on behalf of victims of injustice. Like the truth is, if we honestly take a look at the amount of victimization and oppression that is happening to women and children and certain races and nationalities and people to some degree in our country, but in massive ways around the world. I've said this to you before, but they estimate there are 27 million slaves in the world, mostly women and children. If we are honestly looking at this, at how the powerful are using their power to exploit the weak, and that, in fact, the systems of, quote, justice, police, government, law, especially in other parts of the world that are ostensibly there to protect the innocent, to protect victims, are actually part of the injustice. I remember listening to Lizette, our friend who works out in Guinea, in Conakry, and how she was saying that the criminals, the police lend their weapons to the criminals at night. The criminals go and rob people and come back, give the police back their weapons, and they split the profits. That is injustice, at a double injustice. If we are never angry about that, we are tuned out. We are deaf, possibly numb to the plight of people around us. And in fact, that's very easy to do. For many of us who live generally in a country of safety and privilege, we can spend a lot of our time distracting ourselves, avoiding, swiping, clicking, going to the next thing, to avoid actually looking at the things that, if we looked at them long enough, would probably produce some level of at least discomfort, at least frustration, if not full-out anger. That we should be angry at the injustices that many people in the world face because they weren't born into the side of the world that we were born in. They weren't born into the family they weren't born into the situations that we're in. So many of the things that put us in the place of privilege allow us to ignore the fact that much of the world lives under the oppression of injustice, and it should make us angry. Secondly, I think it is appropriate to be angry when we ourselves have been a victim of injustice. Now, I know we live in a culture that wants to see everything that happens to us as an offense, as an injustice or whatever, but having to wait too long in line to pay for food that it costs way more than it did a month ago is not an injustice. Someone driving too slow in the left lane is not an injustice. The fact that maybe your vacation hasn't changed in 10 years at your employer, that's not a good thing. It's not necessarily an injustice, not certainly when we compare to other parts of the world. But there are times when we have realized we have been in a situation where we have been exploited, where others have used their power and their opportunity and their title and their privilege to take something from us that didn't belong to them, to steal from us, whether money or identity or ourselves or innocence or whatever, to be bullied or whatever, where we have legitimately experienced situations of injustice. And anger is an appropriate response. To be angry at our own victimization it's actually, if we're not angry at all, if there's a numbness in us to the response of how others have treated us, that we know psychologists, psychotherapists tell you there's something wrong on the inside. Anger is a legitimate, natural emotion to be expressed in that place. And then I think in this psalm, certainly in many of the psalms, there is permission to express frustration and anger with God when vengeance seems slow in coming. Vengeance or justice, vindication, whatever it is. He's not just asking for peace in this psalm or rescue. He's asking for vengeance, for vindication, for the wicked to be judged, for the evildoers to be accounted for those who are using their power to be stripped of their power or to have to bow to the power of the Almighty God. There is that legitimate frustration and anger that comes up when we are in the presence of God. These are the repeated themes of the cursing psalms. Anger has a place for us in the presence of God. But it's possible, right, that we could end up in trouble if we just camp out in this anger. One of the writers of the scripture says, in your anger, don't sin. In other words, anger is not a sin, but it's easy to sin when we're angry. Right? Anger itself is a natural emotion in many ways, but it's easy to sin when we're angry. And I think one of the things, actually, interestingly, that reading a psalm like this does is help us to realize that many of the things that we get angry about have nothing to do with injustice. Right? Many of the reasons we get angry are pride, feel offended at how someone's treating us or isn't treating us or spoke to us or didn't speak to us, whether in the checkout line at the grocery store or someone in our own home, one of our kids. We get angry and indignant. We can get angry because we're selfish, because we're just not getting our way. Things aren't going well for us. We get angry because the way we expect things to be and where they are has a gap. And in that gap is where anger grows. We can get angry because we feel entitled. We can get angry simply because we have power. I realized that when my kids were little. One of the reasons why it was very easy for me to get angry at them compared to a guest who came into my home was I was more concerned about what that guest would think. And I would feel like, oh, like maybe I'm on an equal footing with them. But you start to realize, oh, you feel like you have power over kids, so you could just yell at them, right? Like that's what I started to realize is like sometimes the reason we get angry is because we're powerful or we're trying to power up. Many of the things we get angry for have nothing to do with actual injustice. It's not justifiable. It's actually coming out of our own ease and our own privilege and our own selfishness, especially living here in North America. And we want to avoid true injustice. And it's easier to just get angry at what we think is offense or the way the world isn't treating us or should be, whether at home or in our workplace or in our school. And this psalm is a jarring reminder of the fact that there is real injustice in the world. He names categories of vulnerable people: widows, foreigners, orphans. These are the people we should be angry about if they are experiencing injustice, not ourselves. This psalm is a jarring reminder that many of the things we get angry about have nothing to do with injustice, and it is not justified that we are angry. Sometimes coming into the presence of God with our anger, we realize, oh, I can't hold this. I don't have a justifiable reason to be angry. But what about when we do? How do we know if our anger against real injustice has produced something unhealthy or sinful in our lives? Because it can. A couple of months ago, Jen and I were sitting together in our living room, and the house was empty, and it was the beginning of our Sabbath day. We take Mondays together. It's just a day to be together and to grow our relationship with God and one another. And we started we use this app called Lectio 365. We use it pretty much every day. It's a great prayer app. And it leads you through a prayer. And one of the topics for the day was injustice. And it asks you a question. It's saying, oh, what injustice that are you aware of that kind of breaks your heart or causes you to be upset? And she paused the app and she said, oh, what about you? I said, well, it's this human trafficking situation in our city and in the country, in the world, but especially in our city, that we have places, strip clubs, massage parlors, all over the place that are basically like tied to the human trafficking industry that our city just turns a blind eye to. We have nice, beautiful condos right around where our office is. And I've been told by police that some of these condo units are where the pimps live and keep girls. So I said, I have to drive past that stupid strip club to and from work 5 days a week. And I just casually said to her, I just pray that it'll collapse. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I just pray that God will drop a bomb on it. She said, what? Like there's people inside. I'm like, well, no, all the girls and the victims will be safe, but everybody else can just be inside. And she kind of looked at me and she's like, I think that's a problem. And I was totally defensive. I'm like, what do you mean? I said, these guys are perpetrating some of the most evil, they're wrecking young girls' lives for their lives and ruining our city. And I kept going on. And she just said to me, she said, you're really angry. She said, I don't think it's healthy for you to carry that much anger around. It was one of those moments where I was like, oh, I thought it was justified in this injustice, but she pointed out and she wouldn't let it go. And I was annoyed at her. And then I started to realize, wait a second, something's wrong. I realized I have a bit of a go-to when it comes to being angry. And I don't know what yours are. I need both hands for this, right? But some of us, that go-to is like a raised fist, right? Where we are campaigning, where we are angry, where we are with our words, or like, sort of we're coming against this thing, right? Others of us, it's like, I got both dukes up. Like I'm ready for, if there's a fight, I will engage. Someone's going to argue with me, there's a cause, like I'm in it. That's my go-to is combative, right? Others of us are maybe more like this, like I'm going to sit back, but I'm mad, or I'm going to sit out on this one, or I'm expressing anger, but I'm at a distance and I'm not confrontative, but I'm angry. Others of us maybe are like this, kind of throwing up our hands going, I don't know what to do. I'm out. I hate this. I'm so frustrated. I can't do anything about this. There's like an angry powerlessness that we feel. Or perhaps for some of us, it's like this. Silent. We say nothing. Inside, we're seething. That can be what is our go-to response. For me, in that interaction with Jen, and as I went, tried to look inward a little bit, for me, it was like my go-to is like, yeah, I'm campaigning. I've got lots of words. I've got lots of things to say, opinions. And then also, in part, I'm like throwing up my hands because, I'm so like thinking this human trafficking thing is a global juggernaut. Like, this is never going to change. God, you just got to drop a bomb on these places, right? Like, that's what that anger was, just throwing up my hands saying, there's no way to fix this. Interesting. The writer of the Psalms opts for a different approach. He actually turns his anger into prayer. His go-to is prayer. And as he's praying, he begins, right? The language is strong, but he's inviting God to deal with. He's not putting up his fists and taking on his role as the avenger, as the vigilante of justice. He's saying, God of vengeance, can you come into this situation? I can't do anything about this. He invites God to deal with it. He invites God to help him make sense of it. God, explain, where are you? How long? He's asking him questions. He's reasoning in his mind in the presence of God. He's asking God to help him be patient. And then he's remembering how God has been faithful to rescue him and to act in the past. This is what his angry prayer turns into, inviting God into the situation, inviting God to help him make sense of it, inviting God to help him be patient, and reminding himself of how God has come through in the past. You know what I've noticed? I've had the opportunity over the past several years to meet different people who are engaged in the frontline work of fighting injustice, who are pushing up against the systems and the people and the places of major injustice and oppression and exploitation and trying to help victims. And you know what I've noticed about all of them, actually, and this is just my anecdotal experience. They aren't angry people. You know what I see in them? I see a lot of peace. I see a lot of patience. I see a lot of resilience. I see a lot of compassion. And I see a lot of wisdom. That them dealing with these injustices hasn't calcified anger. Anger is not their go-to response. Other things have grown in their lives. And one person in particular that I was thinking that I've had the chance to know personally, that, and actually many of you in our church have as well, is John Castles. John works for an organization called Lifeworthy that before that was called Men Ending Trafficking. That's when I met him at a conference. And he began to talk to me about the things that he was dealing with in fighting human trafficking, and has spent many, many years of his life pushing up against the people and systems of injustice on behalf of victims of exploitation and trafficking. And he's one of those people that I actually see so much of an inner beauty and character that is not angry at all. And so I've asked him just to share for a couple minutes of how he's dealt with and had to deal with some of these emotions, including anger, as he's gotten really close to situations that legitimately should make us angry. And I just want you to listen for a moment.
Hi, my name is John. I've made a lifetime out of working with young people in difficult circumstances. For the last 17 years, I've been delving deeply into the issue of human trafficking and working not only with human trafficking victims, but their families. In recent years, Ontario has given unprecedented attention to the issue of human trafficking with the goal of locking up human traffickers. It's not going well. Human trafficking remains a high-profit, low-risk criminal industry in Ontario. And we're seeing the numbers of young women exploited in the industry continuing to rise. When perpetrators of violence are able to do this kind of damage and get away with it, it makes me very, very angry. In Ontario, many, many human traffickers will never be arrested and charged for their crimes. And when they are prosecuted, a mere 13% of human trafficking charges result in convictions. Now, God sees what's happening in our communities. He knows more than any of us about what it means to suffer. And He will resolve and bring justice in His time and according to His purposes. Now, here's the problem for me. My timeline on how things should be resolved might be very different than His. I find truly that prayer does make a difference. As I wrestle with these issues in prayer, I find sometimes that I become impatient with God. Here's what I've realized, that when we lay aside our personal agendas to the Lord in prayer, He gives us opportunities to serve in ways that are truly helpful. Isn't that wonderful? God involves us in His fight for justice.
Why is it that those directly involved in the fight against injustice seem to be actually people of peace and joy and wisdom and patience? I don't know the answer for sure, but I wonder if it's because as they have fought for justice, they are close to the heart of God. There is a closeness to God that develops over their lives as they wrestle with issues of injustice in the presence of the God of justice. I wonder too if they have become part of the answers to their prayer. Who will help the helpless? Who will help the victims? Oh, I will. That has drawn them closer, that they've become actually the answers to their own prayers. I have definitely noticed, and I've seen this in very small ways in my own life. I haven't spent nearly the hours and weeks and years that many of the people like John have, but I've even noticed this in my life, that the more you spend tending to the cares of the oppressed, you focus less on the oppressors and care more about the oppressed. You focus less on justice for the oppressor and more on care and compassion and love for the oppressed. And yes, justice is a part of it, but your focus shifts away from anger at and that's really where I was in that conversation with Jen, and where, to be honest, I still am and have to deal with. It's like more anger at the oppressor instead of love and compassion and engagement with the oppressed. And I wonder too, because again, this has happened for me, the more we get involved in that, fighting for injustice, against injustice, and caring about the oppressed and the victims and the vulnerable, that our own issues and struggles of injustice seem far less unjust. Like they get normalized and going, oh no, I don't have much to be angry about. These things are real injustices. And so as you have reflected on this, one of the questions I have for you is, what is your go-to expression of anger? Is it the raised fist, lots of words campaigning, I'm going to fight, on social media or whatever? When you get into, you got your speech that your spouse really know, oh, he's talking about that, or she's on that again, or mom's talking about that again, right? Are you that, or you kind of dukes up like you never met a fight you didn't like? It's like you're going to engage, you're going to battle, you're going to argue and go back and forth. Or maybe is it like you're like you're just kind of seething under the surface? Or maybe you're like, like I felt in that moment. It's like, I'm angry. I can't do anything about this. I'm frustrated because I feel powerless about it. Or perhaps this, that you have no words. You don't say anything about it. There is no anger that is expressed. Can I suggest maybe a new go-to in your expression of anger? And that's this, right? That's what this psalmist is doing, is he's bringing his anger to God in prayer. As I left that conversation and Jen said to me, I don't think it's healthy for you to be carrying that. I went to God in prayer. And what began to happen in my life, I realized, what? A bunch of the reasons I was angry had nothing to do with this injustice. It's all been fused together, and what came out was this anger towards people who seem, they deserve judgment or whatever. But there was a whole bunch of anger in my life that I was wrestling with that had nothing to do with that. And I had to sort that out in the presence of God and realize, no, that's just pride. That's just selfishness. That's just frustration. And then and I'm still working on this, him refining that anger. And how does that justified, righteous anger turn into compassion love, action. Because you know what? When this becomes your go-to expression of anger, you know what almost is soon to follow? Is this. Hand up. Right? When we're in this, we say to God, God, what am I angry about that I shouldn't be? That I have no right to be? God, what injustice am I not angry about that I should be? What am I not angry about that I should be? And when that happens, it starts to move this. We say, God, what do you want me to do about this? For me, that prayer and that what should I not be angry about, what am I angry about that I shouldn't be? God sorted some of that out. And then it led actually to me putting my hand up and taking a step of faith that I was wrestling with, that I felt God calling me into, to say, no, run into this. This is where I want you to direct your anger. This is where I want you to go. This is what the step I want you to take. You know, friends, in our world today, and even in the church more broadly, if I can say this, I don't really see this much in our own church, not much, maybe in small ways, but just in general, I see Christian culture and YouTube and pastors, to be honest, sometimes, is a lot of this, and 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 a lot of this. But if we, as the people of God, learn how to do this in the presence of God, to bring our anger there. What am I angry about that I shouldn't be? What injustice am I not angry about that I should be? That leads to this. God, what do you want me to do about this? You know what happens? We get to become like those people, like I was talking about, that we admire, that I admire, who have, in the face of injustice and in the fight against injustice and in the fight for the oppressed and the vulnerable, we have and we become people of peace, of patience, of love, and of wisdom. Let this and then this become our go-to expression of anger.